Ninth meeting of the Standing Committee on Finance. Our orders of the day pursuant to the order of reference of Monday, May 14th, 2012. We are discussing Bill C-38, an act to implement certain provisions of the budget tabled in Parliament on March 29, 2012, and other measures. We are in clause-by-clause consideration. Colleagues, I'll just outline how we are proceeding here, and I'm going to take my time doing so to make sure everybody understands it. We start, as is tradition, we postpone Clause 1 till the end. We start with Clause 2. I will go, obviously, in numeric order. I'll just highlight for the members a couple of things from the motion that this committee adopted on May the 15th. The committee shall proceed to clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-38 no later than Monday, June the 4th, 2012, provided that the chair limit debate on each clause to a maximum of 5 minutes per party per clause before the clause is brought to a vote. That means each party, each of the three parties, will each have 5 minutes for each clause. Should they choose it, they can obviously speak for less if they decide so. The second thing I want to highlight for committee members is if the committee has not completed the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-38 by 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, June the 5th, 2012, the chair shall put forthwith and successively each and every question necessary to dispose of the committee stage of the bill and to report the bill to the House without further debate or amendment, and that the chair be ordered to report the bill back to the House on or before Thursday, June 7th, 2012. So these are two items that I want all members to keep in mind. It obviously helps, I've done these a number of times, it helps if members, because of the number of clauses, would prioritize which clauses they wish to speak more to rather than less to. Obviously, if all three parties take 5 minutes for each clause, we're going to run up against the time deadline of 11:59 p.m. tomorrow night. So, given that, I have, just for your information, I believe we have 58 amendments before us. We have 51 from the NDP and 7 from the Liberal. I hope that number is correct. And so I will start, obviously, with Clause 2. And now, if members wish to group clauses or if they wish to move at a quicker pace or slower pace, please indicate to the chair. So, starting with clause-by-clause consideration, pursuant to Standing Order 75-1, consideration of Clause 1 is postponed. The chair therefore calls Clause 2. I'll just highlight for members, I do not have an amendment until Clause 16. I have NDP 1, which is Clause 16. So, perhaps what I'll do is say for Clauses 2 to 15, is there any member who wishes to debate Clauses 2 to 15? And Mr. Mai, which clause? Clause 4. So shall Clauses 2 and 3 carry on division? Okay. Clauses 2 and 3 carry. So Clause 4, I have Mr. Mai, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Clause 4 allows for a portion of a dividend to be designated as an eligible dividend and a late designation of an eligible dividend. One of the issues we have is in terms of revenues. We have an Australia budget that actually cuts, and in this case what we're allowed to do is to allow income from dividends to be taxed at a lower rate than other income. So in terms of strategy, we're talking about revenues. We don't think that the provision is right, so we are against it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mai. Ms. Nash on this clause.
The procedural issue for Clause 2 and 3, we want it indicated that we're voting for those as opposed to on division.
Okay, I apologize, and perhaps so I will consider them passed. If it's on division, just please indicate to me if members want it on division. If they don't indicate to me, I will consider it's unanimous in favor. So Clauses 2 and 3 then, I said on division, I didn't hear on division, I apologize for that. So Clauses 2 and 3 were unanimous then. Okay, good. So clause 4, thank you, Mr. Mai. Any further discussion on clause 4? Okay. Shall clause 4 carry? On division? On division? Clause 4 on division. Again, I will say 5 to 15. Are there any clauses members wish to speak to? Mr. Mai?
Clause 7.
Clause 7, okay. So I will say clauses 5 and 6. Shall clauses 5 and 6 carry? Okay, that's unanimous. 5 and 6 unanimous. Clause 7, Monsieur Mai, s'il vous plaît.
Encore une fois, on parle.
Once again, we're talking about a power given to the Minister of Revenue, decision-making power. You see the political side, and here we're talking about qualified donees. So the definition of political activity. And we've raised this concern. We're concerned that the government increasingly is giving discretionary power to ministers, and this politicizes processes regarding political activity and charities. So we will oppose Clause 7.
7, further discussion. Ms. McLeod, please, on clause 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just want to make comment that this is routine delegated authority and it's not an uncommon piece of legislation.
Thank you, Ms. McLeod. Further discussion? Further discussion, Mr. Bryson?
Just on 9, actually I have a...
On clause 9?
Yeah, clause 9.
Okay, let's finish clause 7. Any further discussion, clause 7? Okay, shall clause 7 carry? On division? On division. Shall clause 8 carry? It's unanimous? Unanimous, okay. Clause 9, Mr. Bryson, please.
Clause 9, I think we're going to revisit if we pass this probably in the next budget cycle, because we're being told by tax preparers that this is going to create a lot of difficulties. It requires that tax preparers file returns electronically, but doesn't allow clients to, or tax preparers to effectively prepare someone's taxes, and then the client can submit. So it could create a problem where ultimately the final submission to Revenue Canada is not made by the client, and there is a certain accountability that individual taxpayers, some individual taxpayers want to actually submit their tax submission personally, as opposed to having their accountant do it. So I think that this is going to create some unintended consequences, and I'll express those now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. McLeod, please.
Mr. Chair, the tax preparer, the ones that are submitted by the tax preparer, this applies to, but certainly people can have their taxes prepared by a tax preparer and submit them personally. Take me off the list.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion on that, Mr. Bryson?
It is my understanding that that is in fact not the case, and maybe this is one where we ought to had public servants here to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Glover?
I recall very clearly public servants have already answered that question, and it's unfortunate Mr. Bryson may not have heard them, but they were clear. Nothing precludes Canadian from issuing their own tax documents to the CRA in any format they desire. So it's been answered, and we will be supporting this clause.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Shall clause 9 carry? On division? I'll just remind members if they want a recorded vote, they can ask for it. Just have to indicate that to the chair. But Clause 9 carries on division. So I have clauses 10 to 15. Are there any members wishing to speak to any clauses between 10 and 15? Mr. Mai?
On 13?
13? Okay, let me deal with 10 to 12. Shall clauses 10 to 12 carry? Oh, no, 11? Okay, shall clause 10 carry? Yes, that's unanimous. Shall clause 11 carry? Yes. On division? Shall clause 12 carry? Yes, that's unanimous. 12 is unanimous. Clause 13, Mr. Mai?
Yeah. Again, clause 13, we have close to an attack to charities. We have heard that we need to have, charities do play a very important role in our society. The government is attacking charities right now. We've seen it with the environmental organizations. In this case, we have, again, government attacking charities, so that's why we're going to vote against it. There's too much power being given to the ministers, again, in this case, and we are going into a politicizing the issue, so giving more power to the minister and attacking charities as they've been doing now. So that's why we're gonna vote against the clause 13.
Thank you. I have Ms. Glover and then Ms. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is this government who actually has put forward a number of measures to assist charities. We believe very strongly that charities are an important aspect of helping some of our most vulnerable. We'll continue to do things like put measures forward to help charities. And for that reason, this is a very important measure of this bill, and we will be supporting it.
Ms. McLeod, please.
My colleague did articulate very clearly that we will be supporting it, and I think it is important that predominantly the rules are not changing. We are providing the opportunity to really educate the charities and to move forward. So I think it's some tools that are normal delegated process, and it is really, again, allowing the charities to really understand the 10% rule and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. So again, we will support this clause.
Thank you. Ms. Nash, please.
Yeah, just to reinforce what my colleague on this side has said, we are very concerned based on comments that ministers have made, and that there is a chill being created amongst progressive charities, environmental charities, and because there is so much discretion in the hands of the minister, it places increased power in the hands of the minister. Our concern is that this change will have the impact of shutting down dissent and politicizing a process which is a normal advocacy role of many charities. So, as my colleague said, we'll be voting against.
Okay, thank you. Okay, going further, shall clause 13 carry? On division? Shall clause 14 carry? That's unanimous. Shall clause 15 carry? That's unanimous. So I have clause 16. We have our first amendment, which is NDP 1. So I will ask Ms. Nash to speak to clause 16 and move her motion.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move my my motion to amend clause 16 by replacing line 5 on page 14 with the following: on January 1, 2013, a net salary of $137,000. And our amendment is intended to give the Governor General the same salary as the same net salary as he now receives. Canadians are increasingly vulnerable in these economic times. Far too many people have lost their jobs. People are facing an all-time high personal debt levels, and there are several austerity measures in this budget which will in fact reduce wages of the average Canadian. So while in no way disrespecting the work of the Governor General, we appreciate the work that he does, but we do not agree that he should enjoy a salary increase at a time when so many tens of thousands of public sector workers are also losing their jobs. So we don't think that's an appropriate use of our tax dollars.
Okay, thank you. I have Ms. Glover and then Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The proposed amendment would actually provide the Governor General with a net salary of $137,000 effective January 1st, 2013, but would actually not change the proposal to make the Governor General's salary taxable. There are a number of problems with the proposed amendment. Firstly, it's not clear what net salary means. So is the proposal meant to provide that the salary is to be net of related expenses, but then be subject to income tax? And if so, this change would have a material negative impact on the Governor General by significantly reducing the effective remuneration for holding that office. But even if we accept that this amendment is meant to refer to what the Governor General receives after applicable income taxes, it is contrary to the intention and the measure in this bill, which is to make the salary of the Governor General subject to the same exact rules as salaries received by other Canadians. Other Canadians do not receive a certain salary after tax. They receive a salary and are taxed on it. That is what this measure does, and that is what we deem as being fair. As a practical matter, an individual's tax liability is ultimately determined at the end of each year on the basis of income from all sources. Collecting the information necessary to be able to pay the Governor General the proper salary would be incredibly intrusive into the personal affairs of each and every Governor General. And every year the Governor General would have to disclose every aspect of his or her personal income tax situation, not to the Canada Revenue Agency for tax purposes, but just to set the Governor General's salary in the first place. So these are the problems that we see with the amendment. And once again, I have to rebut what my colleague just said about any suggestion that there is an increase in salary for the Governor General. This measure simply makes the salary of the Governor General taxable. There is absolutely no increase. It is just making it fair with what every other Canadian has, and that is a taxable income. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. Mr. Bryson, please.
Just on this, I find myself oddly in concurrence with Ms. Glover on this point, but the reality is that the legislation unamended does not increase the post-tax earnings of the Governor General, and this amendment would impose not just a small pay cut, but a significant and a punitive pay cut that I don't think would be the intention of the legislation in the first case. This is, and it's important again to reiterate, is not the increase is simply to reflect the fact that this legislation makes the Governor General's salary taxable, and so I don't support the amendment, but I do support making his salary and future Governor General salaries taxable in the interest of transparency.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Monsieur Maille, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je suis pas d'accord avec justement ce que la...
I do not agree with what Ms. Glover said about the fact that the salary wouldn't be changed. On the contrary, by increasing it from $137,500 to $270,600, we're doubling it. And if we do the calculations with the Canada Revenue Agency, the after-tax amount would be $175,472. So there would be an increase of $40,000. So when we do the math, we need to be clear and we need to be honest with Canadians. Technically, if we take the math and we look at the amount that was given in terms of salary, if we look at the revenue agency and tax levels, and if we asked public servants what would be the tax rate, the after-tax amount for the Governor General, we were told that it couldn't be calculated at this point because it all depends on the other amounts of income he has. But if we just look at this salary, it's $175,472 after tax, so there's already an increase in the Governor General's salary. And it's more than what the Governor General is currently receiving before taxes or without taxes, because there weren't any taxes. So the amendment that was proposed is justifiable.
Conservatives have about 3 minutes left. Ms. Glover.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to further explain for the benefit of Mr. Mai, the calculations were actually done taking into consideration the Governor General's outside income and whatnot, which, when taken into consideration, allows us to set what the rate would be, which then shows very clearly that there is no increase in his salary at all. In fact, this puts him whole with other Canadians, and once again, Mr. Mai, hopefully that explains it a little bit better, and we can hopefully see you support us on this wonderful clause. Thanks.
Okay, I had Mr. Bryson. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Okay, Mr. Bryson.
Just on this point, this legislation is not designed to apply to this Governor General. It's to apply to the role of the Governor General from now and into the future. And as such, I think that we can't design based on a progressive tax system, which we have in Canada. We can't determine the effect on this Governor General or future Governors General. We can do our best, and I think the legislation actually does that as it is. But it's conceivable that that various Governors General in the future will have various levels of external income. The win in this, from a legislative and public policy perspective, is that we do have the Governor General's salary being taxed. And that is the right, and it's no different than members of Parliament. And if, that when the changes were made, I guess 10 years ago, that there was an allowance of, I think, $30,000 at the time. When I was first elected, the base pay was 60-some thousand. There was a 20-some thousand tax-free allowance. It was changed, and there was the entire amount was made. And some members of Parliament have external sources of income. We don't determine that based on trying to figure out what members of Parliament or Governors General's external supports, or whether they have received dividend income or capital gains income or whatever else. I mean, that's not our job, but our job is to do on this something that I think is a step forward in terms of achieving the transparency and accountability of taxing the Governor General's salary in a way that is as close to revenue neutral as we can design. I think that's.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. I have Mr. Marston and Ms. Glover. If we could make brief points, and then I would like to call the vote. Mr. Marston.
Well, I'm just concerned. I think in essence what we're doing here is grossing up the salary of the Governor General to a point that his gross salary is increased so that his net salary works out to be the same as today. Is that, I see some nods on the other side, which means in essence when you increase his salary so it's taxable, Canadians will now pay that tax on his behalf because he's still winding up with the same net. It's grossed up.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Glover.
I disagree with what Mr. Marsden said, but more importantly, because I know I only have a short period of time left, just in response to Mr. Bryson, the changes will actually take effect in 2013 and subsequent taxation years. So I just want to make that very clear that that's what will happen. But again, this legislation is intended to make the Governor General whole, but have a taxable salary. This makes him whole with absolutely no salary increase, and I think it's the appropriate way to go to serve the purpose and the intention of the legislation.
Okay, thank you. And I will call the question on the amendment NDP 1. All those in favor? I see 4. All those opposed? That's 7. Oh, 7 opposed. The amendment is defeated. Shall clause 16 carry? On division? On division. Okay. I have 2 more clauses in part 1. Shall clauses 17 and 18 carry? (17) on division. Shall clause 18 carry? That is unanimous. 18 is unanimous. I will move then to part 2 of the bill. Part 2 deals with clauses 19 to 51. I have no amendments for part 2. So can members indicate which clause they wish to speak to? So I'm doing clauses 19 to 51. Can I group some of them together, or do members wish to? I'll give you a minute or two to look at that. Shall clauses 19 to 24 carry? Is that unanimous? Okay, that's unanimous. I have clause 25 then, and I will go to Ms. Nash.
Yeah, our concern here is this is something that we did not hear testimony on, and we would like to understand better the implications of this. So, again, it's one of the many items that's buried in this omnibus budget bill, and should properly be before the Environment Committee, or perhaps the Industry Committee, or some other committee. But in any case, we would like to understand it better, and until we do, we're not prepared to support it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nash. I have Ms. Glover.
The government side believes this is an important measure, and there have been ample opportunities for all parties to ask questions, both at a briefing that was held for 4 hours for members. It's unfortunate the critic wasn't there, but following that in committee, we also had officials, and questions were permitted at that point. Our homework has come to where we're now doing clause by clause. It's an important measure that Canadians will see the benefits from, and I believe it's important that we vote on it today to make sure it comes into force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Glover. I go to Mr. Jean now, please.
Mr. Chair, I just, in the sake of moving forward, I'd rather just not make any comment.
Okay, thank you. So shall clause 25 carry? That's on division then? On division? Okay. Okay. So we're at clause 26. Can I group some more together? Are there? Okay. Shall clause 26 on division? I'm on clause 27. What clause would members like to speak to next?
Which number? On this one. We can go to the end. We can go to 51.
Okay, I'm going to call then clauses, unless someone stops me, shall clauses 27 to 51 carry? Unanimous? Okay, that's unanimous. Clauses 27 to 51 carried unanimously. All right, we are now moving to part 3 of the bill. I have Ms. Nash.
Mr. Chair, can we, because we're moving to a part of the bill that was in the subcommittee, which we did not hear the testimony for, And can we take 5 minutes just to prepare ourselves for this part of the clause by clause?
I will suspend for 5 minutes, have a health break, and I call this meeting back to order. And colleagues, we are then Part 3 of Bill C-38, clauses 52 to 169. I want to welcome our officials who've joined us in case members have any questions. I'll just indicate to members for Clause 52, which is the first one we're dealing with, there are 40 amendments in total? Well, 36 amendments. So there's a lot of amendments for Clause 2, or Clause 52. It's problematic when we have the 5-minute timeline because for us to deal with all these amendments within 5 minutes is very challenging. So what I'm going to suggest is that I be a little flexible in terms of time. But what I would point out, it's been pointed out to me, is that 21 of the amendments by the NDP deal with a very similar issue. And so if I could ask that an argument be made with respect to those 21 amendments, perhaps that'll be a good way to group them together. So I would ask for members' agreement that we be flexible in terms of time, but given that we are being flexible and we are deviating from the motion somewhat, I'm going to ask members to make points, not be repetitious, and then when I see that the debate points have been made, I will then call the question and move on. Is that acceptable to members of the committee? Okay, Ms. Glover, you want to speak to that?
Just very briefly, and we have great confidence in your abilities to do that and hold people to account for limiting repetition, et cetera. I do make this other comment, though, Mr. Chair, with regards to territorial borrowing limits. There's another area where 6 amendments, potential amendments, are similar, so perhaps we could look at lumping those together as well. And I mention them just so the other parties can consider them when we get there. It would be NDP 40, 41, 42, and Liberal 3, 4, and 5 for consideration of lumping together.
That's a good point. That's in Part 4. We can look at that as well. Okay, so we have Clause 52. And members all have the amendments before them, and I've been asked by members if they don't have to read them in the record in the interest of time, so I certainly will accept that. We will consider them read into the record. So I will start then with NDP 2 in the name of Ms. Nash.
And I'll defer to my colleague.
And we'll go to Mr. Chisholm, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will be, on behalf of the NDP committee members, be moving these amendments, and I want to speak to them briefly. These amendments are extremely important amendments in terms of dealing with some of the issues that I raised earlier that have to do with the lack of opportunity we've had to focus on the detail of these bills. The Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, for example, has been completely repealed and replaced by a new act. That's just one piece of the that we're dealing with, as well as the major changes to the Fisheries Act that we heard representations again and again and again during our 14 hours to discuss all of these matters, where people pleaded with us to split the Fisheries Act at the very least out of it. And the point I'm making is that the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, for example, the statutory review every 7 years, and these changes have gone through without anybody seeing these changes, without the amendments, the repealing, and the new wording to replace what was repealed, without there being a full discussion and deliberation by experts. Nothing. We had a few late-minute representations here at committee last week. We had very few hours to deal with something that is so critical. And the fact that we're going through it in this manner is going to result in delays. That is, I'm convinced of that, as were many of the presenters that came and spoke to us. It gives overriding power to ministers. It gives overriding power to cabinet to override panels. There's a lack of clarity in terms of the offshore petroleum. I was asking the environmental commissioner who was here at some point last week, I can't remember when, about what's going to happen, for example, with the development of the Old Harry site in the Gulf, in terms of the responsibility of the Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board, Canada Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board. He said he didn't know because it wasn't clear. It wasn't clear whether there's going to be a requirement that panel is able to ensure that there's a full environmental assessment. It is so troubling, Mr. Chairman, and this doesn't happen very often, that I'm almost at a loss for words. I will recover, honestly, but it's the designated projects list, for example, is another area where it was suggested to us that for all questions of responsibility, responsible governance, we should not proceed with the passing of these changes through to the House until those regulations and what is contained in the designated projects list is clarified, because of the impact it has and the impact it will have. It may be, as was suggested by the Environmental Commissioner and a few others, it may be that designated project list, will clarify who's on it and who isn't on it to the point where we have some confidence. But to leave that up in the air is irresponsible, Mr. Chairman, to the extreme. The fact that we're going forward and making these environmental changes, environmental assessment changes, that we're making these wholesale changes to the Fisheries Act, just two pieces of legislation, without any consultation with First Nations people, or without providing for clarification in how and where they will be consulted with, is irresponsible. The fact that we're proposing in the legislation that is provided for in this bill, that we can designate, the federal government can designate the provincial rules to cover a project or an assessment. It's been suggested that that may well be unconstitutional because of where the jurisdiction, where it already rests. Not the least of which it is very clearly ignoring the role that has increasingly been defined by the Supreme Court on First Nations communities that are affected by by any development, Mr. Chairman. And we talked about it in our subcommittee and during the presentations, that we're trying to find balance, we're trying to get rid of duplication, we're trying to clarify. But in the haste, in the overwhelming imbalance that's created by these changes in these various acts, Mr. Chairman, we're creating a huge imbalance that exists out there, because there are different opinions. There are going to be different opinions in the Commons. And if we're committed, as the government says, to their 4 pillars for the sustainable development of natural resources, then we have to ensure that all of those opinions are brought to the table, and that we're able to ensure that there's a full debate and discussion, and we're able to achieve some compromise. But what these changes do, Mr. Chairman, and I honestly believe that members of this committee, if you had the opportunity, if we weren't so jammed up by these time constraints, these absolutely irresponsible time constraints. You are here for a reason as members of Parliament to represent your constituents and to make a stronger country, to make your community stronger. I believe that. But if you had paid attention to the representations that we had in this committee, in our subcommittee, and the concerns that were raised, and the uncertainty that this is going to create. And my point was the imbalance, the power imbalance that's going to be created whenever these projects come forward. This is not Canada. This is not the Canada that I know. This is not, you know, we can have a civil discussion and debate, an exchange of ideas, and come to a conclusion without there being such unreasonable power in the Commons that, you know, a group that's got more access, has got more money, are going to always be the victors.
Okay, Mr. Chisholm, I just want to clarify you, because you are speaking NDP 2 to 36, so I'm just going to, so you are formally going to move the...
Well, we're moving the amendments that we've tabled. We have absolutely insufficient time to discuss them, the merits of them, the detail, the reason why it is that they're important to be here, Mr. Chairman.
But just for my
and so I just wanted to make sure on behalf of this committee that it's understood by all members that this is wrong, that there needs to be some detail, that there needs to be some scrutiny given to this, and this is an absolute abuse of power. Mr. Chairman, at the beginning of my intervention, I said that I was moving the NDP amendments.
Okay. I just want to clarify the... Yeah, I think what we'll do, if it's agreeable to members, is we can have then a general debate, and then I'll ask you to move each one, and then we'll have a vote on each one.
That sounds
Because I assume you want to have a vote. We will group the ones, as I mentioned, the 20 that deal with the same topic, but we will ask you to move then all the rest of them. I'll just clarify with respect to one of them, NDP 2, the last paragraph. If the last paragraph is left in there, it's inadmissible. And that's the paragraph that says, now therefore Her Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate and the House of Commons of Canada, enacts as follows. So I'm assuming you'd want to just take out that paragraph, and then that makes that amendment admissible.
You're referring to the assessment by a review panel?
Nope, this is just the final paragraph in NDP 2. So NDP 2, do you have that in front of you? What I'll do, Mr. Chisholm, is I will continue with the general discussion, and again, I'll just encourage members to speak to as many specific topics as they can. I have Ms. MacLeod on the list. I'll go to Ms. MacLeod. If others wish to speak, please let me know. As I mentioned, I'm being flexible on the motion in terms of time in order to have a good discussion, and then we'll go to the specific amendments, and we'll just have them moved, and then we'll have a vote on each one. So I will go to Ms. MacLeod. Any further members, just indicate to me, please.
Okay.
Ms. Nash.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think most importantly, for many, many years, I was involved in municipal level government, and there was provincial. And the thing that I heard over and over and over again is the unnecessary duplication, the incredible frustration. I think in British Columbia, they just had a project that was finally approved after It was 15 years in an environmental assessment process. We believe that we need to move forward and hit that balance between giving yeses or nos to those people that are moving through the process, having a very rigorous environmental assessment process that protects the environment while allowing important projects to move forward. So I'm going to start because in respect to the comments by the chair, I think I'll speak specifically to the First Amendment. And the first is the proposed NDP Amendment 2. And, you know, I think it's important, first of all, that the preamble is not necessary for the operation of our Environmental Assessment Act. And the preamble actually doesn't line up well with the body of the legislation. So we've taken an approach of 4 pillars of responsible resource development. And those pillars are more predictable and timely reviews. It shouldn't take someone 15 years for a ski resort to be approved. Reduce duplication. We shouldn't have the same answers going to the province and then to the federal government 8-10 years apart. It is just an incredible waste of time and resources when it is the same question. Of course, we want to strengthen environmental protection and we want to enhance consultation with Aboriginal groups, absolutely recognizing the important partnership and consultation that needs to happen. So I think, you know, if the NDP sort of looked at it in the whole, they'd certainly recognize and see that on page 35 to 37, we have a much stronger statement about the context of the Act and that therefore the proposed preamble is actually unnecessary. So again, I think what we need to do is look at the important things we're trying to accomplish, the important pillars, and really to move forward in a strong and positive way for both our responsible resource development and protecting our environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. McLeod. I have Ms. Nash and then Mr. Bryson.
I know there's very little time that rests with us. The rules are 5 minutes per clause, and we appreciate we're getting a few more extra minutes. But this generally, this process is one that I think not only disappoints us and frustrates Canadians. We're disappointed that the government hasn't pursued these environmental changes through more democratic channels, such as the relevant standing committees, which would be the normal process, where members could have met with the experts, the scientists, the stakeholders and others about all these proposed changes. The subcommittee had barely 12 hours on 4 consecutive days to review and assess major changes affecting 69 statutes, including the repeal of key legislation. The entire Canadian Environmental Assessment Act was repealed, and a new act has been introduced in a single clause, which we are debating now, Clause 52, running 63 pages. In fact, page 152 of the bill is devoted to dismantling and rewriting key environmental laws in Canada. It has not undergone proper scrutiny and is not going to have the benefit of public consultations. So it's impossible to know how Canadians are going to be affected by these changes, how the environment, how our economy is going to be affected by these changes, because we will not have had the benefit of due process in order to scrutinize these proposals. My colleague was talking about fish habitat, which is so vital to so many of our communities. We talk about strengthening the economy. If we undermine fish habitat, it undermines the economy of so many of our communities, not to mention the environment that we all rely on. And it's only through thorough and proper environmental assessment and strong regulations and strong enforcement that we ensure that we do not create environmental and financial burdens for future generations. I just want to get on the record once again how undemocratic it is to include all of these environmental changes, 1/3 of this omnibus budget bill coming through the Finance Committee, when it more appropriately, these changes should more appropriately be before other committees. And while we're making a number of specific changes here, or proposed amendments to specific changes, it is the fundamental process that we object to, and that I wanted to get on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nash. Mr. Bryson.
Mr. Chair, we have great concerns about the approach being taken. After 16 hours of study of what the Environment Commissioner has said is the most significant policy reform in environmental regulatory policy in 40 years in Canada, we're left with continued questions. For example, what proportion of current assessments will no longer receive federal oversight given the repeal of the CEAA? What are the projected costs of the changes for each province and territory? What assessments of the adequacy of the environmental assessment process in each province and territory has been conducted? How will a federal project define whether or not a provincial process is equivalent to the federal process? I mean, these questions have not been answered. National Chief Atleo said specifically that to date, First Nations have not been engaged or consulted on any of the changes to the environment and resource development regime proposed within Bill C-38. There is a constitutional and reality of self-government and treaty rights and a moral responsibility of any government to engage Aboriginal and First Nations on the changes in the fisheries. We heard from a very respected former Minister of Fisheries who happened to be a progressive conservative Minister of Fisheries who said that these changes are totally watering down and emasculating the Fisheries Act. They will really take the guts out of the Fisheries Act, and it's in devious little ways, if you read all the fine print, that they are making Swiss cheese out of it. The real scary part of this is that the one minister in Canada has the constitutional duty to protect the fishery, which includes habitat, is the fisheries minister, and these amendments essentially parcel out and water down his fiduciary responsibility to the point that he can delegate his responsibility to private sector interests and individuals. Again, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I know that in the main body of the report that the government members of the committee have expunged much of this testimony, but it's on the record. And we've been given scant time as parliamentarians to do our jobs on this. And the reality is that we are railroading these changes through Parliament without adequate consideration of the consequences, including many of the unintended consequences, which will result from these changes. So I think it's very frustrating to Canadians. It's very frustrating to Canadians who are concerned about the environment. It is worrisome to Canadians who believe strongly in engagement with Aboriginal and First Nations people. It is something that could have devastating effects on our fisheries, but I think overall it is also extremely disillusioning for Canadians who want to have a strong parliament and a functional democracy. This is, I reiterate, for a political party whose genesis in part were the Reform Party that came to Ottawa on the basis in part of somehow accountability and respect for citizens and engagement. As I said earlier today, I almost said Preston Manning would be rolling in his grave, but I realize he's not dead, but I would say that many of the principles that he stood for when first elected are in the Conservative movement today. And it is very disillusioning, I think, for Canadians who want to see Parliament work, and it, I think, is one of the reasons why we're seeing about 20% of first-time eligible voters actually voting, because they don't think that Parliament matters, and the Conservatives are ensuring that it doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryson. I do have 2 more speakers on the list, and then I'll move to the amendments and the votes. I have Ms. Leslie briefly, and then Ms. Glover, please.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Finance Committee. It's wonderful to be here. I normally sit on the Environment Committee. We studied this at the Finance Subcommittee on Environment, but we also studied changes to the Environmental Assessment Act at Environment Committee. We heard from a number of witnesses, all of whom had excellent recommendations. Didn't agree with all of them, but, you know, there was a suite of recommendations there. What's happening with this budget bill does not reflect the testimony that we heard at our committee. For example, the industry representatives said one way to actually streamline and make sure that these assessments are done efficiently is to properly fund the agency. You don't see that kind of a recommendation here. You don't see that in the budget bill. The NDP has brought forward amendments to try and make this bill better when it comes to environmental assessments. We heard from witnesses who said we will see lawsuits as a result of this. There will be lawsuits. We heard witnesses who said there's only one chance to get this right when it comes to environmental assessment. The Environment Commissioner talked about things like the Sydney tar ponds, where there wasn't environmental assessment, and now we're on the hook for it. $1 billion, about half of that is federal money. We need a robust environmental assessment system. The Environment Commissioner also talked about the fact that currently we do 4,000 to 6,000 environmental assessments a year. That's going to go down to about 20 to 30 a year. Not 20 to 30,000, but 20 to 30 assessments per year. This is not the way to make changes to the Environmental Assessment Act. The NDP believes strongly that the Act needs to be modernized. We are 100% behind making amendments to the Act, but this is not the way to do it. And I would suggest that this Finance Committee heed the NDP dissenting report when we did study the Environmental Assessment Act, because there's some very good recommendations in there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Leslie. We'll go to Ms. Glover, and then I'll move to the amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to thank my colleagues across the way for their interest in the bill itself. I can't agree with the statements that have been made by members of the NDP or the Liberals. In fact, I would say that this bill has, in fact, received a huge amount of time to study. Not only that, throughout pre-budget consultations by the Finance Committee, which take place over almost 10 months of the previous year, we heard from a number of people who also had commentary in favor of the 4 pillars that we've put forward. I know that Ms. MacLeod already talked about the 4 pillars, which talk about predictability and timely reviews, that talk about Aboriginal consultation, which is very, very important. And it's important that all parties actually do their homework when it comes time to looking at these bills. And delay for delay's sake, frankly, is just obstruction. And this government is committed to moving forward to protect Canadians' interests. This bill does that. This bill is supported by a number of agencies, a number of organizations, a number of Aboriginal people, including Chief Clarence Manny Jules, who was very clear with the subcommittee about the benefits of this bill. Aboriginal people are protected under the Constitution, contrary to what was said earlier. Their rights to consultation are protected under the Constitution. They will be, we will continue to observe those rights, as we have done all the way along. But let's not forget there were experts who did come to both committees, the subcommittee and this committee, like Mr. Ray Orb from the Saskatchewan Association of Rural Municipalities, like so many others. We believe as a government that this is important to not only the economy of Canada, but to the future generations who follow us, to our children, to our grandchildren, and to those who come after us. We believe in environmental protections so that we do sustain our environment for generations to come. This bill does that. It enhances environmental protections in many ways. And I would hope that in the future, opposition members, rather than just delaying for the sake of delaying, that they actually look at the measures in the bill. An extraordinary amount of time has been given, more than in 20 years of time has been given to this bill when you compare it to other bills of previous parliaments who've been very generous and flexible. And unfortunately, many times critics didn't show up, or, you know, NDP and Liberal members didn't even show up for the briefing. But I can't prevent that. The briefing is not. The briefing is not.
Stay away from members.
Yeah, well, the
being
briefing
somewhere
is.
not. Let's honor the tradition in the House, which is not to refer to the evidence.
Well, the briefing is different.
Okay, but let's. I would just suggest we stay away from that in terms of. Yeah, I
Or-
think briefings were made available and members avail themselves or not.
I spent 4 hours at a briefing, Chair. 4 hours with officials, and would have appreciated some attendance by the other members. I know members on this side were there. Nevertheless, we're going to proceed and do what we believe is right for Canadians. We're going to do what we believe is right for our children and our grandchildren. This is what we believe to be right and fair and just, and we hope that the opposition will reconsider and vote in favour so that we can do exactly what our intention is to do. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bryson, I have you under 5 minutes, so you do have some time, but I just encourage, if we can make this a final comment and then move on, I'd really like to move to the amendments. Mr. Bryson, briefly.
Mr. Chair, despite what Ms. Glover has said, opposition members have in fact done their jobs. It's government members who have not done their jobs, and if government members had been paying attention, they would have listened to Chief Atleo, who said, if enacted, this will increase the time, costs, and efforts for all parties and governments. As First Nations, we will take every opportunity to challenge these provisions. In its current form, Part 3 of C-38 clearly represents a derogation of the established and asserted First Nations rights. That's what opposition members, I believe in both the NDP and the Liberal parties, in doing our jobs, took note of. So we're not, despite what she's saying, it is the opposition members who are fulfilling their fiduciary responsibilities as members of Parliament to the public by listening to witnesses and trying to embrace their testimony and ensure that their voices are being heard. And Sean Atleo, as the National Chief, is a very important part of Canada's governance. And he's being ignored by the government members. And it's opposition members who are giving people like Sean Atleo and the First Nations and Aboriginal peoples he represents, and experts like the former Progressive Conservative Minister of Fisheries, Tom Sidden, who said that these changes are watering down, taking the guts out of the Fisheries Act, watering it down, making a Swiss cheese out of it. These are not uninformed Canadians. And, you know, Ms. Glover, it was the Tom Sidden who said that it's not becoming of a Conservative government, but I don't believe that Ms. Glover's comments are becoming parliamentarians to say that we're not doing our jobs when in fact we are. These are Canadians with important views who are being railroaded and ignored. And so we will continue to do our jobs, and that's the responsibility we have. And frankly, Conservative members have the same responsibility. Okay. Notwithstanding Ministers' offices' talking points, they have an opportunity to actually engage their own brains and hearts on some of these things.
I think we're getting away from the actual subject of the bill itself. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move, and colleagues, if you want to follow along in terms of your order, the agenda you have today, the orders of the day, we have Clause 52. You can see the amendments under there. And I'm going to ask, I believe Ms. Nash will be moving the NDP ones, and I'll ask her to start with NDP 2.
I move NDP 2, except for the last paragraph.
Okay. All those in favor of NDP 2? See 4, 5. All opposed? 6. That's defeated. Ms. Nash, NDP 3, please.
I'll move NDP 3.
Okay. All in favor of NDP 3? All opposed? That's defeated. NDP 4.
I move NDP 4.
All in favor of NDP 4? All opposed? That amendment is defeated. NDP 5.
I move NDP 5.
All those in favor? That's 5. All opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 6.
I move NDP 6.
All those in favor? That's 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 7.
I move NDP 7.
All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 8.
I move NDP 8.
All those in favor? C4. All those opposed? 6. It's defeated. NDP 9.
I move NDP 9.
All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 10.
I move NDP 10.
All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 11.
I move NDP 11.
Okay. All those in favor? It's 4. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. We'll now move Liberal 1. Mr. Bryson.
I move amendment to Liberal 1.
Okay. Liberal 1. All those in favor of Liberal 1? We have 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 12.
Move NDP 12.
All those in favor? I see 2.
All those in favor?
Now I see 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. Now NDP 13, I will just tell you, NDP 13, the vote on this will apply to NDP 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, and 36. So NDP 13.
I move NDP 13.
All those in favor of NDP 13? I see 4. All those opposed? 6. NDP 13 and those other amendments are defeated. We'll go to NDP 16.
I move NDP 16.
All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. NDP 21 is next.
Move NDP 21.
All those in favor? 5. All those opposed? 6. We'll go to NDP 35.
Move NDP 35.
All those in favor? It's 5. All those opposed? 6. It's defeated. Okay. Shall clause 52 carry? On division? On division. So I will move to clause 53. Now, colleagues, can I group some of these clauses, or do members? We obviously have, in Part 3, we go right to Clause 169. Can members indicate to me which clause they wish to speak to next? Can I group clauses 52 to 60?
53.
Or 53 to 60? Okay.
Thanks. Sorry, can you repeat that question? I'm still catching up being new to this committee.
So we have, so in Part 3 we have clauses 52 to 169. 52 is carried. I'm just wondering if I can group some of the clauses, or if members wish to speak to each one. So what we've been doing is members have been indicating to me, they'll say, for instance, I wish to speak to 57, and then I will group 53 to 56. And then we take a vote on that. Point of order.
Point of order. I believe we missed a couple of NDP amendments earlier that we didn't finish. There were 3 that were not bulked into.
We did those ones.
We did? Okay,
Yeah,
very good. Thank you.
It was 16, 21, and 35. Yeah. So can I group 50? Ms. Leslie, just indicate
Thanks.
which one you'd like to speak
right
to.
now?
Yeah.
I would like to speak to Clause 133 and Clause 135. Thank you.
133 and 135. Okay. Okay, so at this point, Can I group clauses 53 to 132? Okay, carried on division or unanimous? On division? Just testing you. So clauses 53 to 132 carry on division. We will go to clause 133, and we'll start with Ms. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this amendment we think is incredibly important to the budget bill. It is basically the result of a lot of testimony that we heard at committee, as well as a lot of what we've been hearing, quite frankly, in community, in the news, from our constituents. The problem with the budget bill, the way it's written around the changes to the Fisheries Act, is it actually removes the obligation to protect fish habitat. This is extremely serious because what the result is, the Act will say it protects fish. Fish, and what it says is fish that they can't be killed, essentially. But it doesn't say that fish can't be maimed, or their growth can't be stunted, or their ability to reproduce can't be affected or impacted. It also doesn't say that their habitat or the fish that they rely on to eat or their other kinds of food that they have, none of that has to be protected. I think this is very, very serious. This is exactly the issue that we did hear the former fisheries ministers come out against. And we've heard from a number of people who share that concern. The Fisheries Act is one of the strongest environmental protections that we actually have in Canada. We heard some incredible testimony, some quite moving testimony, I'd say, from Will Amos at EcoJustice, who talked about this Fisheries Act, this part of the Fisheries Act being a part of the fabric of who we are as Canadians, how it came about because of the Ottawa River and the sawmills on the Ottawa River, and people living along the river realizing that the sawdust from these sawmills was ending up in the river and it was killing the fish habitat in the river. And that's actually the genesis of this. And he talked about it in such a moving way about how it's not just a piece of legislation. It is about who we are, standing up for our environment, protecting our backyards, and essentially this whole country is our backyard. And that it is a very strong piece of environmental protection. The other problem with the changes to the Fisheries Act that we heard was that the impact can be, as long as it's temporary, it's fine. But what does temporary mean? What does serious harm mean? What do all of these things mean? It's very hard for us to figure out the definition of many of these terms in the new budget bill. Temporary, would it be temporary to say back in Halifax that we give a license to a developer to infill the Bedford basin and build a condominium on the infill? But as long as it's in the clause with a 99-year lease, as long as the clause says, and then the condo developer shall return it to its original state, is that temporary? Arguably it is. Arguably, maybe that's not considered to be permanent. When it comes to serious harm, we need to broaden the definition of serious harm to include health effects on fish generally, non-permanent harm or destruction of fish habitat. So what we're trying to do is encapsulate all of that into one amendment by broadening the definition of serious harm so that we take into account the permanence, we take into account destroying habitat, destroying the place where fish reproduce, the food that they rely on to stay alive. I'll wrap up with a little piece of testimony from David Schindler, who spoke at the Finance Subcommittee, and he talked about the experimental lakes that he was working on, and it was actually the testing on acid rain. And he said that they had an experimental lake set up where they did acid rain testing on fish and found that the acid rain didn't kill the fish, but it killed their entire food source, and the fish starved to death. The way this budget bill is written, that can happen. If we're not going to protect fish habitat, we may see fish starving to death. We may see the next generation of fish being destroyed. So I'm hopeful that with the amount of attention that this provision has received publicly, at committee, in the media, I'm hopeful that government members will vote with us to broaden the definition of serious harm, because I think it's the right thing to do.
Any further discussion on this amendment? I have Mr. Hoback, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, I guess I'll just go back to the experience I have going back into my province of Saskatchewan and the riding that I have in Prince Albert and the impact of what was happening at present day. You know, we heard in testimony in the subcommittee from Mr. Orb talking about the rigmarole and the process they had to go through to put a culvert into a dry ditch. And, you know, there's nobody in Saskatchewan that wants to see any type of reduction in fish habitat. In fact, if you take my riding, the town of Nipawin has some of the best fishing festivals all summer long with different events. And they take that very, very seriously. But what was happening was we're seeing people go to the nth degree to stop projects that would just end up going on anyways and adding a considerable amount of costs into a project that there's no reason or rhyme for doing that. That, to me, is just explaining why some of these changes need to be done. So I wouldn't get too excited about this thinking that we're going to lose all the fish next year and that we're not going to have anything to fish, because in reality that's not true. I think the reality is we're just balancing the Act up to reflect what it needs to reflect, and I think that's what we're seeing here, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Hoback. I will then move to the vote on NDP 37. All those in favor? I see 4. All those opposed? I see 6. That's defeated. Shall clause 133 carry then on division? Shall clause 134 carry on division? Okay, I'll go to clause 135, and we actually have Liberal 2, so I'll ask Mr. Bryson to speak to that.
I move Amendment Liberal 2, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bryson. And I believe, Ms. Leslie, you wanted to speak to this as well, please?
Oh,
Yeah,
already. Sorry,
you're
I was waiting for Mr. Bryson. I was really happy to see this amendment in here. I think it's a great attempt to fix one of the biggest problems of this piece of legislation. A non-derogation clause is a pretty standard form to ensure that when you're writing a piece of legislation that it doesn't accidentally trample First Nations rights or Aboriginal rights. It's a really succinct, clean way of doing things. There are so many pieces in this bill where we're not sure what the language, what the implications of the language will be. I think that a bold statement in the budget bill saying that you can't read into this as trampling on Aboriginal rights. I think that's the right thing to do. It's, you know, reading it on its face, I'm not an expert in non-derogation clauses, but reading it on its face, it seems like pretty standard writing, so I think is the appropriate language that we need for this bill, just to make sure that we don't do anything accidentally, because I certainly know the government wouldn't want to do that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Leslie. I have Mr. Bryson again. Okay, I'll go to Mr. Bryson and then Mr. Adler.
Yeah, just in response to Ms. Leslie, and I appreciate her support and her party's support for this amendment, but I must say I disagree with her on one point when she says that she is certain that the government would not want to do this, because the first National Chief Sean Atleo, in fact, Atleo said when he was before committee, in its current form, Part 3 of C-38 clearly represents a derogation of established and asserted First Nations rights, and that is in fact in part, this is in part a response to that, and I appreciate Ms. Leslie and her party's support for this and understanding of the importance of making it clear.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Mr. Adler, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the opportunity to speak on Liberal 2 amendment. You know, Section 35 of the Constitution Act of 1982 recognizes and affirms the existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. As a matter of law, reference to Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982 does not need to be included in the Act. There are differing views of the intent and purpose of non-derogation clauses, and these differing views tend to create confusion and uncertainty, and for that reason, non-derogation clauses should be avoided. The Fisheries Act is a law of general application, key objectives of which are to conserve and protect fish and fish habitat and properly manage and control fisheries for present and future generations. This involves the balancing of many competing interests, and the guidance provided by the courts allows for this balancing. The inclusion of a non-derogation clause could seriously compromise the ability to balance competing interests and conserve the resource. Therefore, we do not want to risk this by putting in this clause.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Adler. We will then move to a vote on Liberal 2. All those in favor? There's 5 in favor. All those opposed? 6. That's defeated. Shall Clause 135 carry? On division. Okay. I don't have an amendment until Clause 142. Can I group Clauses 136 to 141? Shall Clauses 136 to 141 carry? On division. Okay, we'll move to Clause 142, and we have NDP 38, in the name of Ms. Nash. Ms. Nash, do you want to move that?
Yes, I so move. It's NDP 38. I move NDP 38.
Okay. Can I go to a vote on NDP 38? Or okay, vote on NDP 38.
It's a recorded vote, Mr. Chair.
Recorded vote on NDP 38.
Ms. Nash?
Voting in favor.
Mr. Mai?
Yes.
Mr. Caron?
En faveur.
Ms. Leslie?
4 in favor.
Mr. Bryson?
In favor.
Mr. Adler?
No.
Ms. Glover?
Contre, against.
Mr. Obach?
Against.
Mr. Jean?
No.
Ms. McLeod? Against. And Mr. Van Castro?
No.
Defeated.
Okay, I declare NDP 38 defeated. Shall Clause 142 carry? On division. Colleagues, I do not have another amendment until Clause 163, so I'm proposing we group Clauses 143 to 162. Shall Clauses 143 to 162 carry? On division. We will then go to Clause 163, and we have NDP 39. And Ms. Leslie has indicated she wants to speak to it. Ms. Nash, do you want to move it?
I'll move NDP 39.
Okay, NDP 39 is moved. Discussion, Ms. Leslie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment deals with the proposed amendment to the Species at Risk Act. As I'm sure you all know, Species at Risk Act is an important piece of legislation to protect our species at risk. And currently, the way it's written, the way this amendment is written, sorry, I'm getting my amendments mixed up, I guess. The way the government amendment would be written, it would allow the minister to have as many times as he or she wanted to allow a reapplication for a permit that would actually disrupt species at risks. Just saying that makes me realize why we so badly need the NDP amendment. It makes no sense if we have a herd of caribou in northern Canada where a development project or a mining project or any kind of project is going to disrupt this herd, which we know are species at risk. Why in the world would we give authority to the minister, a political appointment? Why would we give the ability to a minister, not a scientist, to issue permits to allow that herd to be disrupted for an infinite amount of time, for as long as he or she wants? It makes absolutely no sense. These are species that are at risk. By their very definition, we shouldn't be allowing for any kind of impact that will that makes it less likely that they will survive, that makes it less likely that they will flourish, or perhaps even come back as a species, as a robust species. So this amendment would actually get rid of that power because, quite frankly, it's too much power for the minister. If scientists have decided that this is a species at risk, we shouldn't allow the minister to just willy-nilly allow these permits that will disrupt those species. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Leslie. Further discussion on this amendment? Mr. Van Kesteren on this?
The NDP member is suggesting that we delete line 31 which would make authorization again for 5 years of permits and 5 years of agreements. And the government feels that with longer durations, authorizations can be issued for a period better suited to the activity in question. Longer-term authorizations will also allow the federal government to work with project proponents and other partners in achieving long-term meaningful conservation actions for the species at risk in Canada. This is important in a context where protection and recovery actions such as restoring habitat or increasing the number of species often must be undertaken over a longer period than the existing duration of permits, like 3 or 5 years. Longer-term authorizations with enforceable conditions will therefore provide for improved compliance, certainly for stakeholders, and will set the right context for more effective longer-term conservation actions as part of the permit conditions. And the other part, has the member spoken to the lines 35 on page 181 and the line 8 on 182? Because I would like to speak to that as well, too.
You spoke to the entire amendment, so
Okay.
I would do that at this time, Mr. Van Kester.
Then I would add to that legally binding timelines to be set in regulation will ensure a consistent approach across federal statutes when it comes to timelines and for issuing and renewing permits. Environment Canada will continue to reevaluate the SAR authorization requests rigorously to determine what risks the proposed activity poses to protected species, and if the activity can be authorized without jeopardizing the survival or recovery of species at risk.
And we'll go to a vote on NDP 39. All those in favor? Okay, that's 5 in favor. All those opposed? Oh, sorry, Ms. Nash on this.
Vote on this.
You want a
I'm sorry.
recorded vote? Recorded vote on NDP 39.
Ms. Nash?
Yes.
Mr. Caron? Mr. Mai? Madame Leslie?
Yes.
Mr. Bryson? Mr. Adler?
No.
Ms. Glover?
Contre, against.
Mr. Robach?
Against.
Mr. Jean?
No.
Ms. McLeod? Against. Mr. Van Castro?
No.
Okay, NDP 39 is defeated. Shall clause 163 carry? On division. Colleagues, can I group clauses 164 to 169? Shall clauses 164 to 169 carry? Yep, so the clauses are 164 to 169. This essentially takes us to the end of Part 3. Okay, so I will call clauses 163 to 169. Shall they carry? On division, they carry on division. Colleagues, we are at the end of Part 3. It's about 6:25. We have 50-minute bells at 6:30, so we have a short time to get to the House. We also have 23 votes tonight, which was not expected when we established our timetable. So we were supposed to sit until 9:30 p.m. I suspect we'll be voting for at least a few hours, unless something changes in the House, but we obviously don't have control of that. So I'm going to recommend to the committee that we start again with Part 4 tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. I just think that would be best, and frankly, to ask officials and interpreters and others to stick around for 3 hours, we may come back for half an hour tonight. I just don't think it's reasonable to do that. So, Ms. Nash?
Mr. Chair, I understand what you're saying. We don't know how long we're going to be tonight. They aren't. Most of the votes are not from the NDP, so I'm not sure how long they're going to take. But I just want to express the concern that tomorrow that we have enough time to be able to go through all of Part 4, where there are a vast array of many substantive changes. And I guess we're able to go up to midnight, I assume.
What the motion says is at midnight, if, say, we haven't finished debating all the clauses and voting on all the clauses, then I, as your chair, according to the motion, have to put the vote on each successive clause. So the vote would be on each clause, but if members wanted to debate a clause that I had not yet got to, then they could obviously not speak to that clause.
Okay.
So obviously, I'm assuming members have certain clauses they really wish to speak to. And I'm assuming all members of the committee would want to get to all the clauses by 11:59 p.m. So, I mean, we could come back tonight. The problem, and you're absolutely right, it's not, it's not the three parties sitting here that are forcing 23 standing votes. So, but unfortunately, the rules of the House are such that we could have 23 standing votes. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. I have Mr. Marston.
I'm just curious. We have half-hour bells, do we not? 15 minutes. Only 15? No.
We have 15-minute bells.
Oh, well.
Okay, so I'll adjourn and we'll come back tomorrow at 3:30 p.m. Okay, thank you. Meeting adjourned.